You're listening to the OCD Stories podcast, hosted by me, Stuart Ralph. The OCD Stories is a podcast dedicated to raising awareness and understanding around obsessive-compulsive symptoms. I do this through interviewing inspired therapists, psychologists, and people who have experienced OCD. Welcome to the OCD Stories. And welcome to episode 372. And in this one, I got on Jeff, who has kindly agreed to share his story with us. Now, I recorded my conversation with Jeff earlier this year when my throat was still a bit rough. So if I sound different in the episode, that's why. So in particular, we talk about getting a diagnosis, emetophobia, his role as a mental health counsellor, suicidal themed OCD, paedophile themed OCD, sexual orientation themed OCD, depression, somatic themed OCD, worrying about panic, relationship themed OCD, meditation, and much more. And thank you to our Patreons who help make this podcast possible. And if you would like to find out more about Patreon and the rewards you can get, then head over to patreon.com/the OCD Stories podcast, or the link will be in the episode description. And thank you to NoCD for supporting the podcast. NoCD offers effective and convenient therapy available in the US and outside the US. To find out more about NoCD, their therapy plans, if they currently take your insurance, or to download their free app, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD Stories, or the link will be in the episode description. So thank you to Jeff for his time and his story. I enjoyed chatting with him and hearing his story. Hopefully you guys will too. And thank you to you guys for listening as always. I deeply appreciate it. Without further ado, here is Jeff. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's good to have you on. So yeah, I'd love to hear your OCD story, and you can share that now, as little or as much detail as you want to give.
Sure. Yeah. I've gone back and forth a lot. I'm sure, a lot of the people that listen to the show will understand the decision between should I prepare and write a bunch of bullet points or just go in and just wing it. And I've done the latter, decided on the latter. Old me probably would have done a lot more preparing. I definitely fall into the category of people who, first of all, probably had OCD at a very young age, or definitely at a very young age. I don't know if you can be born with it, but if so, probably. And I wasn't diagnosed until a little over 2 years ago when I was 27. So that's the kind of big picture. So as a kid, early memories, a huge thing for me was emetophobia, or fear of throwing up. I guess I'll also say that I'm privileged to work as a mental health counselor now. So I have the sufferer perspective and also a little bit of the clinical perspective like you. So, that informs the way I look at it. But I was deeply terrified of throwing up as a kid. And actually, my very first OCD therapist told me that she has never had a client who had emetophobia as a child who she didn't ultimately, diagnose with OCD, which, she specializes in that. So it makes sense. But also, none of the people that she's ever seen up front and who had that experience as a kid, she did not find to have OCD. So that's interesting. I don't remember exactly how it started. I think it kind of started with the first time that I ever had a stomach bug. But after that point, I would compulsively ask my mom to feel my forehead. That was the big compulsion. Am I sick? Am I going to throw up? Do I have a fever? If I ever watched a film that had throwing up in it, which a lot of, 90s just kind of wacky family movies have, things like Home Alone and whatever, the throw up scene, I would lose it, totally lose it. And I'd need to run to one of my parents and tell them and just get that reassurance. That was huge. And that really continued all the way until I was in college. I think I finally became a little bit more desensitized to throwing up when I was in college, and I went to a state school and saw people throwing up on the weekends all the time. And eventually that just, faded out a little bit, or a good amount. I also know as a kid, I was really obsessive about not being able to sleep. And, looking back, I can just identify now, like that spike coming in the middle of the day, the intrusive thought, you're not going to be able to sleep tonight. And then it was just, it was over from there. And then I did have a ton of trouble sleeping because I was so anxious. That was a huge thing as a little kid, and it drove my parents crazy. I also can remember being, I don't know exactly how old, probably 8 or so, pretty young, and learning what suicide was. That set off an entire obsession. Is that something I want to do? And I can pretty safely say too that I was a pretty sad kid. I think a lot of my story, and I'm still really kind of trying to make sense of this in therapy today, but a lot of my story takes place at the intersection, I guess, of your kind of concrete obsession and compulsion loop, but also certain characterological obsessive traits and compulsive traits, and just kind of a way of being. And I know that even as a little kid, I was very, 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 very trapped in my head, kind of analyzing what was going on around me. In a lot of ways, just wasn't kind of in it, and just doing childhood and just doing whatever stuff was presented, in school or at a birthday party or whatever, because I was so kind of aware of myself. One of my core memories is of my dad at some point when I was very young, again, definitely younger than 10, kind of sharing as like almost just like, hey, isn't this interesting? He shared with me we call it like the purple elephant paradox or whatever, try not to think of a purple elephant. Obviously you immediately do. And I, there's an irony in it, because that obviously that alone didn't change anything. I was predisposed and probably already suffering, but in a way, my narrative is that just blew my brain up and ruined my mind. And the irony is that I use that same paradox all the time with the people that I counsel. Especially, I work at a small college north of Boston, and the number one thing we're dealing with is anxiety, and people just being so tormented by thoughts and emotions and not knowing what to do about them. And I use that paradox as an example, and as a way to introduce kind of the work we're going to do together all the time. But it's also so meaningful to me because for so long, that moment of kind of learning, if you don't want to think about something, then you are going to think about it, seemed to like define the rest of my life and my emotional landscape. So, sort of learning that and becoming aware of my own mind and having this understanding that, it'll do things that you don't want it to do because you don't want it to do that. But I didn't get the other half about acceptance and how it's all meaningless and everything. It really tormented me. And so, I guess just sticking to themes, I'm also one of those people that feels like I've been around the block with that. Certainly as I got into, even just a very early adolescence, like probably 5th grade or so, 10 years old, 11 years old, I was, starting to get a lot of, obsessions about, am I a pedophile, all of that stuff, which is funny because I was like a child myself, but, the second whatever hormones started, coming into my brain to begin puberty, that was already there. I remember being in middle school and having a ton of, sexuality OCD, wondering if I was gay. And that was so confounding to me because even as a middle schooler, I was a pretty proud ally and pretty clear on my views about, sexuality being okay, no matter what it is. And, at the same time, I would, just have a deep pit in my stomach over and over again, day after day after day, wondering if I was gay. And I just was so confused by that. I can remember moments in middle school and high school too of feeling very compelled to organize and, put everything at a right angle in my bathroom, in my bedroom. And then depression hit. And you had somebody on the show recently, I can't remember his name, but he talked about the top 6 emotions of OCD?
Oh, Dr. Stephen Phillipson.
Yeah. And that was one of my favorite episodes that I've ever listened to, just because I related to every single thing he was saying so much. And listening to your podcast, I tend to relate to the things that people are talking about, but something about the way he was presenting, those emotions and different examples, I really, really, really identified with it. And especially when he was talking about depression and the way that you can be depressed, but still have it be primarily an experience of OCD. And I feel like that really describes how I felt my freshman year of high school, specifically when I was, I guess, 14. Um, I at the time and for years later would look back and say, well, I was depressed that year. But since being diagnosed with OCD, it makes so much sense to me why, yeah, I mean, I was depressed, but I didn't have trouble getting out of bed. It was just the intrusive thought of being depressed and the intrusive kind of remembering, oh, you feel like shit right now. And this is, it was such torment because moments of feeling normal or of feeling happy were in and of themselves, a trigger and a reminder, because it was so unusual. And then it was like, boom, back to the self-awareness, back to the, actually, this is how you feel right now. And then everything would kind of drop and feel sad and feel gray again. And I think in a lot of ways, that year was the worst year that I ever experienced in terms of my mental health. It was definitely the only year that I seriously contemplated trying to take my life and had a bit of a plan for that. I never attempted or anything. And then later on throughout high school, my obsession would switch at different times to being a little bit more health related. I had a long period of being aware that I, was thinking, being aware, well, I was always, I was saying, but being aware that I was breathing and feeling, super focused on that and controlling my breath, tightness, just, and in general, there's so many places where I feel like the line blurs between OCD, anxiety, it for me in some ways obsessive compulsive personality disorder, although I don't think I fully meet the criteria for that. And so just, frankly, very unwell throughout most of my kind of childhood and middle school and high school. And at the same time, I really thrived. I always had a very strong group of friends, was very involved in a lot of different things, was well liked, succeeded academically, and yet, just on the inside, so much suffering for so long. Also in high school, there was a period of just being obsessively worried about, am I going to have a panic attack? And I don't think I ever really did have a full-blown panic attack, but I got close sometimes, and that was enough for me to take all sorts of safety behaviors. I dove into the little supplement aisle in the grocery store and was buying different herbal supplements that were supposed to make you not anxious, and I would carry them around with me. I would have such bad anxiety while traveling, so there was definitely some kind of agoraphobic elements that I was experiencing at a lot of times. And I was a senior in high school, and people wanted to do certain things, and I just felt like I couldn't do them. One example that comes to mind is senior prom. A lot of people, as groups of friends, would rent limos to go to the prom. And my date, who was also my girlfriend at the time, really wanted to do that. Being a public school, they also provided a kind of free public option for any students that, didn't want to or couldn't afford to take a limo, which is great. So there was buses from the high school to the prom. And I just had it in my head that if I were to be in a limo with a bunch of people, that would be so overwhelming and so overstimulating, and I would definitely have a panic attack. And so I told my date girlfriend that, we couldn't do it. We couldn't join the rest of our friends in the limo to go to prom. And she was just so upset. And I mean, I was upset too, and I didn't even have the language for this stuff. I just knew that I felt like I couldn't do it. And that it, along with so many other things, gave me so much anxiety. Um, yeah. So, I mean, I'm aware just as I'm talking about it now that there's obviously so many things that I'm missing and so many themes. It really was a lot. And another big thing for me always has been relationship OCD. Um, to the point where I can remember being in seventh grade and having my first kind of real crush I would say maybe my first like post-puberty crush. I had some crushes in elementary school, but those feel pretty different. And I have this memory of the moment I was like, I'm standing in the hallway in my middle school, and the moment that I kind of recognize that I have a crush on this girl who's in my friend group and who, I just desired to be with so much and had such a big but 1 millisecond after having that sort of warm and gooey crush feeling was already this kind of then sad and upsetting feeling of doubt. And it's one of the things that just kind of, makes me laugh about how ridiculous OCD can be, because it's one thing to be in a relationship with somebody and then have the doubt, do I really like them? Are they the right person? Whatever. But a crush who actually never even ended up having a crush on me back and who I never even got to the point of dating, just the feeling itself of having a crush was already enough reason for me to doubt and for me to have a kind of anxiety spike, but also I would say like a little bit of like a depressive spike. Do I really feel that? And probably the analysis of and doubt of and overthinking about my own feelings and thoughts and opinions. Do I really like this person? Do I really like this thing? Why do I feel the way that I do? Or, do, do I only enjoy this thing because I feel like I'm supposed to? What's actually going on like a brain level? What is the influence of kind of culture and cultural expectations on the way that I'm feeling right now? That's probably my most like long-standing OCD theme, and is still the focus of a lot of the work that I'm doing now. So I never had a successful romantic relationship until after I was diagnosed with OCD. I guess that's a good segue to kind of my diagnosis story, which is that it is 2020, and I am in my first semester of my second year of grad school, and I went to BU and I got a master's degree in counseling. And being that it was the second year, we did our internship, which is a requirement for graduation from a master's program. And I did my internship at a private high school in Massachusetts. I always wanted to work in the school system as a counselor, so I was lucky to be there. And my supervisor at that internship, his name is Dr. Adam Reed, and he is one of the co-founders of CB Team in Arlington, Massachusetts, which is a really, really great private practice for fully specializing in OCD, ERP, anxiety disorders. So happy to give him a shout out. And he was such an amazing supervisor. He really put me on the path that I'm still on, which is heavily acceptance and commitment therapy focused. But we were in a supervision session, and he was teaching me the worry time technique. And so he as a good supervisor does, he had me do it like a client would do it. And one of the things that I mentioned as a current worry in my life was, I just started seeing this girl recently, and like I enjoy spending time with her, but I worry that, what if I don't actually like her? And he didn't really bat an eye or anything, but later on in that conversation, we were talking about OCD because we were talking about a student that I had on my caseload, and thinking about diagnosis. And he mentioned, there are lots of different types of OCD. It was relevant to what we were talking about at the time, but also I kind of think he made sure that when he was like, no, actually, there's lots of different types of OCD. And he mentioned, there's even just relationship themed OCD where you kind of, you might doubt whether you like someone, that you're seeing, or whether they're right, or whether they like you. And just like so many bells went off in my brain. And I remember after that supervision session was lunch, and I was supposed to be on lunch duty. Because at a private school, even the counseling intern, they'll give you kind of things that you need to do. It's a boarding school, so there's always, different duties you're supposed to have. I spent the whole lunch in the bathroom. I Googled relationship OCD, and I ended up on the International OCD Foundation website, which has great articles that talks about different, subtypes of OCD. I spent that whole hour in the bathroom, sitting on the toilet in a stall, just reading articles, and was like, holy shit, I think this is it. And it was not the first time in my life that I had thought about OCD for myself as a possible, maybe this is what's wrong with me, maybe this is what's going on. But there had been at least 2 or 3 times earlier in my life, even in high school, and then again in college, and then again after college, where I had that thought, been really suffering, and Googled OCD, and then just, only gotten the kind of stereotypical, kind of most common definition and examples that we're all familiar with, which didn't apply to me. I've never had a problem with hand washing. I've never had a problem with, I guess whatever the other kind of most typical, needing to go upstairs multiple times or tap things. And so I just, was always disappointed any of those moments. But then suddenly I had all of this other information, a much more accurate kind of list of examples of what it can look like, and I think importantly, like what it really is at its core, outside of the different concrete manifestations, what it really is as a kind of internal system. And from that, I made an appointment with an OCD specialist and had a few sessions and was formally diagnosed, and everything just made a lot more sense after that. And I had the very classic experience of looking back on so many different things in life and being able to say, oh, that's pretty much what was going on there. And that's pretty much what was going on there. It's made me look with such a different lens at my family and my parents and cousins and aunts and uncles, and what they bring to the table, in terms of obsessive and compulsive qualities. I won't diagnose anyone. That would be wildly inappropriate. They're my family. But there's some, I'm not an anomaly in my family. There's these qualities, and it's made me think a lot about, as a culturally and ethnically Jewish person, I'm not religious. And my family is minimally religious at best, but we are definitely Jews in the way that we, view ourselves, view family, view the world. And culturally, and in media, I think everyone's pretty familiar with kind of Jews and anxiety, and Jews and neuroticism, and that's all there, and that's all true. And I think particularly in my family, I see a lot of, that being kind of manifested as obsession and compulsive qualities. I think that there's, really, really interesting relations there between generational trauma that comes with being Jewish and probably ways in which that has created a compulsive need to check and to be sure and to feel safe and to feel prepared. Some of my grandparents, it astounds me how much kind of meticulousness they exhibited in their lives, all aimed at preparing and being sure and being efficient and saving and checking. And these things are, on the one hand, qualities that I'm so grateful for, because they, set me and my family up for success and for prosperity in a lot of ways. And then also there's this really obvious cost to me of, ability to let go and relax and be spontaneous and just kind of enjoy life and to be flexible. And, one of the many things that I would love to go back to school and do a whole PhD on would be looking at this link, particularly between, American Ashkenazi cultural Jewishness and mental health, particularly OCD and obsessive compulsive traits. One other thing I want to mention that's definitely important to my story is my relationship to meditation and mindfulness, which I picked up in the fall of 2016 at a moment that I think was second only to my freshman year of high school experience in terms of how much I was suffering. It was, again, that kind of just incredibly intrusive, depressive form of OCD and any sort of internal experience I was having, any sort of thought, just being so immediately associated with doubt and rumination, overthinking. And I had been interested in meditation and mindfulness for a bit, but I really dove into it that fall of 2016. And I experienced profound relief from picking up a meditation practice, learning how to sit with just how uncomfortable I felt in my body pretty much all the time, learning how to sit and have the experience of feeling like my chest was tight when I was trying to breathe, but not doing anything about it, just sitting there. And I think in a lot of ways, what I got from a daily meditation practice was more just exposure, actually, just exposure to anxiety and to discomfort than anything spiritual for a while, or anything that increased my concentration. Being an obsessive person, I pretty quickly was signing up for silent meditation retreats, and we have the Insight Meditation Society in central Massachusetts here, which is a world-renowned Vipassana meditation retreat center. So I was lucky to be close by and went on multiple multi-day silent retreats and have been really touched by the practice and by the Dharma. And it informs my clinical work a lot now. I would say I'm just heavily mindfulness-based, heavily acceptance-based, acceptance and commitment therapy. And which is kind of funny to me, because when I first went to grad school for counseling, I thought I was going to be all in on existentialism and psychodynamic, psychoanalytic practice. And I still have a lot of respect for those things, but it's not as relevant to the population I'm working with and the issues I see. Having a daily meditation practice, again, changed a lot of things for me. This was all before I knew I had OCD, but it provided a lot of relief, and then became something that felt very stale and very ritualistic and very loaded with, I need to do this. And I need to do this before I leave the house every morning. And it can be so hard being somebody who's perfectionistic and has OCD and picking up something like many things like meditation, where the teachers say to you, it's best if this is a daily practice. You really want to try and do this every day. And if you don't know that you're the type of person that's going to, really take that and grasp onto it and assign a ton of importance to it and experience, real shame and dismay at yourself if you then miss a day, there's kind of a process, I think, post-diagnosis of realizing which things actually aren't meant for you, or how it's best for you to interpret certain things, especially if they have to do with, how to do something well or how to be healthy. I've had a lot of obsessions about exercising and diet. My first OCD therapist pointed out to me how kind of ritualistically and compulsively I was treating my meditation practice. And so a 4-year daily practice actually ended in the fall of 2020 when she pointed that out to me. And I'm grateful for it, because not meditating for 15 to 30 minutes every morning, I think finally actually allowed me to try and practice mindfulness in everyday life and in a more moment-to-moment way. And I still have not picked up a daily practice. I kind of find myself moving closer every week, every month. I'm signed up for another silent retreat that I haven't been on one since before the pandemic. And so, yeah, it just feels very relevant to me in that it's like provided profound relief quickly, not quickly, but eventually, stopped. And yet it's still very much there for me in some ways. but it's a long process of trying to find out how to actually find my way back to it in a way that works best for me.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And obviously, thank you for sharing your story. And I want to ask a few questions about that. But we'll stick on meditation for a second. So I agree with you. Meditation I've been sporadic with it. I don't think I've been as disciplined as you were initially, but it has helped me. Many people with OCD, of course, struggle with meditation because suddenly they're left alone with their thoughts, and also we know it's more about anchoring on something such as the breath. But anything you'd say to that you've learned?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, having OCD and going into it, obviously for me, I didn't know again that I had OCD at the time, and it was still very beneficial. But there probably is a cap on how beneficial it can be, or beneficial up to a certain point. If you don't know things about your own mind and about your own habits, that might make more sense. Part of what was so liberating about it for me was, when you learn meditation, a huge foundation of it is just watch your mind. It doesn't matter what's going on. You're going to have all these crazy thoughts, and you just sort of let them come and go. That's obviously something that everyone could benefit from learning, but I think especially people with OCD. And so that was, being on some of those retreats and having those experiences made me actually feel seen in certain ways that I never had before. And again, I think that there's a maybe level of, intrusive thoughts and mind chatter that is probably even above and beyond what a non-OCD sufferer experiences. And so I do look back on it and think, wow, I really wish there was maybe a well-known meditation teacher that was able to give talks or give instructions like for this population, because I wonder what adjustments might be made. I think in general, there's so much of a misconception about meditation that it should be peaceful, or that you should eventually experience a moment of quiet. And so many people try it, whether they have OCD or not, and just get frustrated with themselves because they're like, all that's happening is my mind is going crazy. So being really, 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 really clear about what you're expecting to happen up front, having, just an accurate kind of version of what's supposed to happen, rather than the kind of vague idea that you get from media that it's going to be all serene, seems like top important to me.
Yeah, really, really good point. So at what point did your supervisor find out that you'd got an OCD diagnosis?
I mentioned it, I think shortly after that, because, I was diagnosed actually only like maybe 2 months after that conversation with him. And then we still had the whole spring semester. And we didn't go too much into it. And again, I kind of think he already probably knew, but I don't know that for sure. As somebody though that got his PhD working with OCD and then started an OCD private practice, I imagine that he has a pretty good spidey sense for it, which I've started to develop too as a practitioner, and I'm grateful for. But yeah, definitely like midway through that year, I told him, and I think we just used it as a way to sort of inform my experience of learning to be a counselor, and also my experience of learning how to even better relate to some of the students I was seeing that were on that spectrum.
Yeah, thank you. So with your parents, obviously it sounds like with emetophobia, you're asking for lots of reassurance and getting them to check your forehead and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What did they think of that? Did they ever, I mean, they must have sensed you were an anxious child, but did they ever sort of name it or?
Yeah. And, I think about this a lot. I think my impression is that being anxious and kind of obsessive, so normal in my family that it wasn't much cause for alarm. I think so. My mom actually has told me that she also had emetophobia as a child. I think that in some ways in some ways, there was almost probably an endearing quality to me being an anxious, neurotic kid, because it's like, okay, yeah, this is what we're like. And I don't think that this was happening on a conscious level for them. I think it's just, how do you know what you don't know, or how do you see what you don't see as specific or different? It's kind of just me being a member of the family, being an anxious kid. I think that if I, as a child, was really, really, really upfront with them about, how many different things were going through my head, and, some of the different content, they probably would have, been a little bit more like, oh, all right, whoa. but just being obsessive about not being able to fall asleep, being obsessive that I might throw up, kind of just seen as normal. And I also get the sense that for my parents to have really had any alarm bells raised by me, and to think, okay, we should, maybe do something about this, or he should see someone, or maybe this is, a level of suffering that just shouldn't, that should be addressed. I get the sense that that would have turned a lot of attention back on themselves for them, probably like, well, if he shouldn't be experiencing this, then what have I been doing my whole life, in a lot of ways, with what I experience in my own mind. And so I think that kind of manifests as a lot of resistance, for them, and I'm sure for parents everywhere in certain situations. It's like, to actually, confront and view something that your child is going through as abnormal, but you've been going through it yourself too, means that you need to face something about yourself that you might not want to face. And that might have been a lot less common and accepted to face, 20, 30, 40 years ago. So nothing was really done. When I was a senior in high school, I did finally tell my parents that I was incredibly anxious all the time and wanted to see a therapist. And they set me up with one. He fell asleep in our second session, and I didn't go back. I did end up going back when I was in college to therapy. That was my first good therapeutic experience, my senior year of college. And then again, as an obsessive person, after that point, I had a string of therapists, and I've spent a lot of money and, a lot of time in the car, and a lot of time searching, and been just, spreadsheets and pulling up 100 tabs on my computer and all that. And, we talk about how people will see a lot of therapists before they get a correct diagnosis. And I spent a lot of time just obsessing and ruminating to therapists that never, that just went into the content with me and never said, maybe this whole process and this whole behavior is what the issue is.
Yeah, well, look, it's unfortunate it happened, but obviously it's a good illustration, right, of what we always say. Yeah, but look, I'm glad you got there in the end, and you found someone that could help. So, yeah, well, I was originally going to ask you what got you in, because you got the diagnosis after you were already doing your master's. So, but you kind of answered it there, right? I'm guessing it was just wanting to help other young people as you were suffering.
Yeah, it's a little bit more specific than that. It's basically that I was actually quite interested in teaching near the end of college and in the years after college, but I didn't know what I wanted to teach, so I started looking into kind of private progressive education, and that movement has a lot more kind of academic flexibility. I had the sense that I wanted to be in a high school and be working with students in a meaningful way, but I was like, I'm not going to be a math teacher, English teacher, whatever. With the help of a teaching fellowship that I did for progressive education, I realized that I was pretty interested in wellness education, social emotional learning, teaching mindfulness to students. So I dove into that a little bit. And then what I found was, in the private school world, a lot of the wellness educators are also the counselors on campus. And I was like, okay, I'm already interested in psychology, and I studied a lot of developmental psychology in college. I am interested in teaching. I am interested in mental health. So sure, like I'll become a counselor. That's cool. Then I can be a teacher and a counselor. When I went to school for counseling, it kind of started as just a means to an end to jump back into this wellness education world, but also be able to be the counselor. And then it became much more of, wow, there's such an art to this, and it's such a beautiful practice. And, even if I leave aside wellness education, there's so many different things that I could do just as a clinician. So my interest in that picked up a lot. And after graduating, I tried for a couple of years to get a job at a high school and wasn't able to, and then was lucky enough to get the job that I have now at a private college. I don't do the wellness education piece here, technically, although I think a lot of being a counselor for college students, especially college students at this point of kind of post-pandemic life, still involves a lot of wellness education and sort of helping people learn how to take care of themselves. But yeah, so it sort of started with the education piece.
Yeah. Brilliant. And so when you started seeing an OCD therapist or OCD specialist, was it the sort of traditional ERP route that they took with you?
So in the sense that this therapist was skilled in ERP and acceptance and commitment therapy, yes, but I am not an easy client to have to just kind of do ERP. On the one hand, I think maybe like truly or in some sense objectively, my obsessions and compulsions are a little bit harder to create a hierarchy for and do exposures for. There's so much less in the kind of physical plane and in the behavioral plane in that way. And I know this isn't unique to me, but I certainly have a high degree of the, doubt and overthinking about treatment itself. When I try and do exposures, that becomes, we've done exposures about doing exposures because I'm so, concerned with whether it's happening right. And like, why don't I actually feel triggered? And am I addressing the right thing or not? And so it's very slippery, but I've also been helped by it for sure. I've been helped a lot by medication and the combination of medication and therapy. I think that in some ways I've been helped paradoxically, just in some ways I've noticed in therapy that, I'll spend a session planning an exposure or planning something to focus on, and then I won't even really get to do the exposure because it won't be bothering me as much anymore just after the session. So yeah, there's a lot that I'm still trying to, figure out for sure in OCD therapy. And I see a really amazing therapist now who's in the Boston area, named Steven Bugelovich. And I would recommend him to anyone with OCD or just perfectionism. He has so been able to grasp the kind of vague and ambiguous and very characterological kind of rules-based and right and wrong-based personality structure that I come into it with. And we've been working together for about a year and are still definitely in a lot of ways like figuring out what we're actually doing. But he sees me and we're doing good work. I would love to say that I have had more of an experience of just like, climbing that, exposure hierarchy and having the timer on and doing something for, a minute and then doing it for 2 minutes. And it's just not how it looks for me.
Yeah, no, fair enough. But it's good to share that it's not cookie cutter. It's not going to be one size fits all. So was there like a light bulb moment for you where something just clicked, be it the treatment, understanding OCD or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, it really was when I got diagnosed. I mean, I think there was a kind of mounting excitement from the moment that I had that conversation with my supervisor, and then, my first kind of 2 sessions with my first OCD therapist, interviewing, and started to feel pretty sure, this is what's going on. This explains a lot, but I didn't want to jump to assumptions or jump to too many conclusions myself. When she said, I'm a OCD specialist and that we've spent 2 hours talking and I'm diagnosing you with OCD, that was just I mean, I was like on cloud nine, and again, just was able to look back at everything, and it just seemed to make sense. Um, in some ways, I think I was probably pretty annoying about it because like that, that became my whole thing for the next like 6 to 10 months. And I again was starting a new relationship at that point. And on the one hand, it was it was a beautiful relationship. It was the first time that I got to a point in a relationship where I told somebody that I loved them. And it was just the first time that I was able to have those spikes of, do I like this person? What are my feelings actually all about right now? Are my feelings going to go away all of a sudden? Did they already go away now that I'm thinking about them? And just say whatever, and give her a hug and forget about it. Um, and I think in a lot of ways, I was I had some behaviors that were detrimental to that relationship because I started to view everything in terms of reassurance seeking and safety behaviors. And, I kind of saw OCD everywhere, even where it wasn't, um, and saw the qualities in people, that most people have to some degree, but I was like hyper focused on it. So light bulb moment for sure. Maybe, a little bit too much, which is typical for me, but overall great.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So, let's think. Words of hope. What would you tell someone, or what would you tell one of your college pupils that came in?
Yeah. You know, words of hope. I think that there's so much, there's so much peace and just cessation of suffering that can come from learning to change your relationship with your thoughts and with your emotions. Um, it's so simple and seems impossible or weird at first, but the pivot, as Stephen Hayes would love to call it, that's that simple pivot of looking at your experience and noticing it, but being somewhat separate from it instead of just being your experience is so powerful, and I think has the power to help in basically any situation, and across diagnoses. And it seems to be something that is easy to forget, but you can kind of always come back to, and find a little bit of peace and a little bit of ability to ground and rest, even in the midst of some really uncomfortable feelings.
Yeah, really good point. So let's say you could pick up that not 20-year-old, let's say 18-year-old self, maybe the self that was deciding whether or not to go in that limousine. What would you tell him?
Oh, it's such a boring answer, and I almost was like, I hope he doesn't ask this, but it's such a cop out. People say it, you have OCD. I just want to be like, you have OCD. Like, don't get diagnosed in 10 years, or 9 years, get diagnosed now. But assuming that that's like not allowed because it's too easy or something, I think your emotions and your fear and your panic won't kill you. It can't actually harm you or hurt you, and what you're scared of is being scared.
Yeah. Nice message. So you got a billboard. How would you want written on that billboard?
Yeah, I've thought about this one too, and my motto recently has been, don't take life too seriously. Now, if this was a billboard, I can imagine a lot of backlash because it's a very privileged thing to say. A lot of people, depending on their situation, they can't just be told not to take life too seriously. It's easy for me to say, I don't have to take care of, I don't have kids. I don't have the types of responsibilities and burdens that a lot of people have. But for people like me, and maybe in other situations, just kind of giving yourself permission to care less, not take life too seriously, not be so kind of, attached to outcomes and so graspy, and just, it's cliche, but remember that it's all you ever have. This life is all you have, and this moment is all you have really at any point within life. If you're taking it too seriously, if you're, just kind of doing it, if everything you're doing is to plan for the future or plan for that, time when you can finally relax or finally be happy, then, you're missing out, I guess. Of course, this makes me sound like I'm some like enlightened, always happy, always chill person. It's so not the case, but that's what I strive for.
Yeah, in spite of any feelings you may be having.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. So, lastly, is there anything else you wish you could have said today?
Sometimes I've talked to people who have OCD or who I've diagnosed with OCD, and they don't know anyone else, or they think they don't know anyone else who has it. And I feel like that's probably never true. It's probably never actually true to not know someone. It's just so hidden. And I've been so grateful to connect with other people. Some of them long-term friends who, we were friends for years and never knew that the other one also had, and sometimes just people that I've met, at a party randomly, and it somehow comes up right away. But connecting with other people who have OCD and being able to laugh at the things that you've experienced and the things that you've thought is so beautiful. And, such a way to feel seen and understood, and also just, immediately closer with like a new friend or an old friend. And so I guess I really encourage that for anyone listening that feels like maybe they listen to this podcast and they read articles, but they don't connect with other people about it in their life. That they'll probably be surprised, if they do open up about it with people. Shouldn't take that long until they find someone else, and then they can, make fun of themselves together. It's a good time.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, thank you for sharing. And look, thank you for sharing your story and being open and honest, especially as a counselor. I appreciate it, sort of leading by example.
Yeah, no, I hope to. And I feel lucky as a counselor to have OCD. I think that it helps me a lot. And both in the kind of spidey sense with diagnosis, and I'm not going to be that counselor that spends hours with somebody and doesn't say like, wait a minute, you just have OCD. And then, after that point, being able to help. So grateful for that. And grateful to have been on the show. I'm really excited to share this with everyone I know, because I love talking about myself and love people listening to me talk about myself for an hour.
Nice.
Yeah,
I like it. Well, look, thanks again.
Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. And thank you to our Patreons who helped make this episode possible. And if you would like to find out more about Patreon and the rewards and benefits, then there will be a link in the episode description. If you enjoy the OCD Stories podcast and would like to support us with a one-time tip/donation, please go to theocdstories.com/support. All tips, no matter how large or small, are greatly appreciated. Please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you to NoCD for supporting our work. If you want to find out more about NoCD, head to go.treatmyocd.com/theOCD stories or click the link in the episode description. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.